Samuel Osei was 26 years old when he married Edna Carr, and the wedding was the least complicated thing about either of them. The wedding was at the county registrar's office on a Thursday morning in October, with two witnesses, which were Samuel's friend Marcus from the warehouse where Samuel worked, and Edna's neighbor Dorothy, who was 70 and who had been watching the situation develop from her side of the fence for 3 months, with the contained expression of a woman who had decided she was going to withhold judgment until she had more information. Dorothy had more information by the Thursday morning, and her expression at the registrar's office was no longer contained, but was something warmer and more certain, which was the expression of a person who had withheld judgment correctly and was now in possession of the thing she had been waiting for before she formed it. The room at the registrar's office had a window that looked onto the high street, and the October morning light came through it in the specific way of October light, low and golden and present in a way that summer light was not. And it fell on Edna Carr, who was 81 years old and had white hair and the posture of a woman who had never stopped considering posture worth maintaining, and who stood beside Samuel Osei in the October light with the quality of someone who had arrived at a significant moment through a path she had not expected and was not performing surprise about, but was simply present in. Samuel was 6 feet tall and had his father's broad shoulders and his mother's eyes, and a quality of stillness when he was thinking that his colleagues at the warehouse had initially mistaken for slowness, and had come to understand was the opposite. He had come to England from Ghana at 19 with his uncle's family, and had been in the town of Harwich for 7 years, and had built a life that was functional and decent, and that had been, until 3 months before the Thursday morning at the registrar's office, a life without particular complication. The complication had arrived in the form of a flood. The flood had been a July flood, the specific kind of July flood that happened in the hill country of this part of England, when a period of unusually sustained rain produced water movement in the streams and rivers that was not what the streams and rivers were built to manage. The flood had taken 3 streets in the lower part of Harwich and had deposited a quantity of water in ground floor rooms and gardens, and had caused the kind of damage that was assessed in the weeks following by the specific combination of insurance adjusters and municipal engineers and the people who lived in the affected properties, and who had the direct experience of the damage that no assessment fully captured. Edna Carr's cottage on Mill Lane was one of the affected properties. Samuel had been one of the volunteers. The volunteer effort had been organized by the community center, where Samuel had been a member since his 2nd year in Harwich, initially because it had a football pitch, and subsequently because the community center was the kind of place that accumulated community in the way that well-run community centers did, through consistent presence and the specific offer of belonging that came without conditions. He had been assigned to Mill Lane with a wheelbarrow and a pump, and the understanding that the work was whatever the work turned out to be. The work on Mill Lane had turned out to be, at number 14, a woman of 81 who was standing in her kitchen in Wellington boots, watching the water pump working, with the focused attention of someone who was going to understand how the equipment functioned before the morning was over. He had introduced himself. She had looked at him for a moment. She had said she was glad they had sent someone who looked capable. He had said he would do his best. She had said she expected nothing less. That had been the beginning. The flood work had taken 3 days at number 14, which was longer than most properties on Mill Lane, because Edna's cottage was older than most properties on Mill Lane, and older properties responded to floodwater in ways that were specific to their age and construction, and that required more careful management than the response of newer structures. Samuel had come back on the second day and the third day without anyone asking him to, because the work was not finished, and because the woman who lived at number 14 had a quality he had found himself thinking about on the evening of the first day in a way that was not entirely explicable. But that was not the kind of thinking he dismissed when he did not immediately understand it. On the third day, when the cottage had been pumped and dried to the degree that 3 days allowed, Edna had made tea. She had made it in the kitchen that still smelled of the flood, and in mugs that had been washed twice since the flood water had been in contact with them. And she had put the mugs on the kitchen table that was now dry, and she had sat across from him with the directness of someone who did not have the time or the interest in social performance. She had said what she said on the third day that had made Marcus, when Samuel reported it to him, suggest that Samuel had perhaps been in the sun too long. She had said she had a proposition. He had said he was listening. She had said she was 81 years old and had lived in this cottage for 53 years and owned it without mortgage. She had said she had a heart condition that was managed, but that was not going to become less significant with time. She had said she had no children and no surviving family that was close enough to be relevant to the situation she was going to describe. She had said she needed someone reliable in the house, not a carer. She had said this specifically and with emphasis because the distinction mattered. Not someone to manage her life or make her decisions or treat her as a project. Someone reliable in the house. She said she had been watching him for 3 days and that she had a specific quality of perception about people that had been accurate for 81 years and that she was not inclined to distrust now. She said he was reliable in a way that was not performed, and that she had found, over the course of 81 years, to be considerably less common than it should be. She said her proposition was this: she would put the cottage in both their names if he would agree to live in it as a resident and as what she described as a present and contributing member of the household, by which she meant someone who was there rather than technically there, someone who noticed when the boiler was making a noise and who would drive her to the hospital when the hospital was where she needed to go, and who would be, in the full practical sense of the phrase, a person she could rely on. She said she understood this was unusual. She said she had lived for 81 years and had found that the things that lasted were frequently the things that were unusual enough that ordinary categories did not apply to them. She said she was not asking him to decide now. She said she would like him to think about it. He had thought about it. He had thought about it for 2 weeks with the stillness that his colleagues mistook for slowness, and that was actually the thorough processing of a mind that did not like to reach conclusions before the evidence supported them. He had thought about what she was offering and what it required, and what the realistic shape of the thing would be, and whether the realistic shape was something he could inhabit honestly, and whether inhabiting it honestly was something that was in his own interest as well as in hers. He had concluded that it was. He had gone back to number 14 and said yes. Edna had said good. She had said there was a legal arrangement to be made and that she had a solicitor and that the arrangement would be the arrangement she had described and that she would like to do it properly. He had said he thought doing it properly was the right approach. The solicitor had suggested that the arrangement she was describing had legal precedent, but that the cleanest form of it, given the property transfer and the long-term nature of the commitment, was marriage. Edna had looked at Samuel. She had said the solicitor was not wrong. Samuel had said he supposed not. They had both considered this for a moment. Edna had said she wanted him to understand that she was not asking him to perform a marriage. She was asking him to consider whether a legal marriage was a structure they could both inhabit honestly over the duration of what they were proposing, which was an honest, practical arrangement between two people who had assessed each other and found each other reliable, and who were building a life arrangement on that assessment. She had said she had spent 81 years watching people build arrangements on thinner foundations, and that she was not interested in pretending the arrangement was something it was not, but that she was equally not interested in pretending that an honest, practical arrangement between two people who respected each other was less than it was. He had said he agreed with that. They had married on the Thursday morning in October, with Marcus and Dorothy as witnesses, and the October light coming through the registrar's window, and Edna standing beside him with the quality of someone who had arrived at a significant moment and was simply present in it. The people who found out about the marriage found out in the way that people in small towns found out about things, which was through the specific information transmission system of a community in which everybody knew enough about everybody else to recognize when new information was significant. The responses divided along the lines that responses to unusual things divided along, which was between the people who encountered unusual things and assessed them, and the people who encountered unusual things and reacted to them. The reactions were the ones that generated noise. Samuel's colleague at the warehouse, a man named Terry who was 45 and who had a specific relationship with other people's business that involved considerable engagement, had looked at Samuel across the warehouse floor on the Monday after the wedding with the expression of someone who had heard something and needed to verify it. He said he had heard Samuel had got married. Samuel said he had. Terry said to the old lady from Mill Lane. Samuel said to Edna, yes. Terry had looked at him for a long moment with the expression that contained several competing impulses. The impulse toward the reaction he had formed before he had information, competing with the impulse toward the specific quality of uncertainty that arrived when the person you had formed the reaction about was standing directly in front of you and was not the person the reaction required them to be. He said, "What for?" Samuel looked at him. He said, "What did he mean by what for?" Terry said he meant, "What was the reason?" Samuel said the reason was the same as the reason anyone married anyone, which was that the arrangement made sense for the people in it. Terry said she was 81. Samuel said he was aware of that. Terry said he didn't understand. Samuel said he understood that Terry didn't understand. He went back to work. Dorothy from next door was a different category. Dorothy had been watching from the beginning and had processed the watching and had arrived at the Thursday wedding with the conclusion she had arrived at, which was that the thing she was witnessing was one of the things that did not fit a category, and that attempting to make it fit one was the error and not the thing itself. She had said this to her husband Gerald on the evening of the wedding, with the succinctness she brought to things she had thought through properly. She had said, "Those two people have understood something about each other that most people spend their whole lives looking for, and she was not going to be the kind of person who missed that because it came in an unexpected shape. Gerald had said it was still unusual. Dorothy had said most things worth anything were. Edna and Samuel settled into the life at number 14 with the specific quality of two people who had made an agreement they both understood and who were fulfilling it in the way they had agreed to fulfill it, which was honestly and with the practical attention of people who were present in their arrangement rather than performing their arrangement. He drove her to the cardiologist on the first Tuesday of every month and waited in the waiting room with a book, which was what she had asked him to do, because waiting rooms were better with books, and she did not like to be watched waiting. He was in the house in the evenings, and the specific quality of being in the house was the quality she had described, the quality of someone who noticed things and attended to them, the boiler noise, and the gutter that was pulling away from the fascia, and the specific electrical fault in the front bedroom that turned out to be simpler than it looked. She cooked on the evenings she cooked, and he cooked on the evenings he cooked, which was approximately half the evenings respectively. And they ate at the kitchen table and talked about the things they talked about, which were the things that two people talked about when they had agreed to be honest with each other and had found that honesty produced conversations of better quality than the alternative. She talked about the 53 years in the cottage and the specific history of Harwick and the things she had observed over 8 decades with the perspective of someone who had been paying full attention for a long time. He talked about Ghana and his uncle's family and the warehouse and the things he was reading with the perspective of someone who had been in several worlds and had not stopped thinking about the differences between them. There was the specific quality of ease that came from an arrangement that was not performing itself. The arrangement also included, as Edna had described to the solicitor, the property. The cottage at number 14 Mill Lane had been transferred into both names with the legal structure the solicitor had recommended. Samuel had said at the time of the transfer, and on several occasions since, that he wanted Edna to understand he was not in the arrangement for the property. Edna had said she knew. She had said she had spent 81 years developing the specific perception about people she had mentioned, and that if she had not been able to tell the difference between a person who was present for the arrangement and a person who was present for the property, she would not have made the proposition in the first place. He had said he understood that. She had said good. She had said she wanted him to have the property because she had no one else to leave it to who would understand it the way she needed it to be understood, which was as a place rather than an asset. And because the arrangement required the security to be mutual in order to be honest, and because she had watched him for 3 days in July with Wellington boots and a pump, and had formed the conclusion she had formed, and had not revised it. He had not revised it either. The people in Harwick who had formed reactions continued to have their reactions for several months, and then, gradually, as reactions to things that persisted eventually did, the reactions became less urgent as the persistence of the thing they were reacting to made the reaction feel less relevant than the thing itself. Terry at the warehouse had stopped looking at Samuel with the competing impulse expression by the end of the year. He had not said anything that acknowledged the revision of his physician, because that was not Terry's way. But the absence of the expression was its own acknowledgement. Dorothy had brought food twice in the autumn, when Samuel had told her Edna's heart condition had had a difficult month, and the cooking had been more than the household could manage, and the food had been received in the way it was offered, which was simply, without the ceremony that would have required something in return beyond the thanks that both parties understood was sufficient. On the Saturday morning in November, when the first proper frost of the year came down on Harwick, and the Mill Lane gardens were white with it, and the October light had moved into the November quality that was less golden and more clear, Samuel made tea in the kitchen of number 14 and brought 2 mugs to the sitting room where Edna was reading in the chair she had read in for 53 years. He set the mug on the table beside her. She looked up. She said thank you. He sat in the chair across from her that had been the second chair in the room since the Thursday in October, when it had moved from the position it had been in when he arrived to the position it was in now, which was the position of a chair that belonged to someone who lived there. He opened his book. She went back to hers. The frost was on the garden outside the window, and the tea was hot, and the sitting room was warm from the radiators that he had bled in October when they had not been heating properly, which was one of the things he had noticed and attended to. It was, in its specific and honest and uncategorizable way, a life. It was a life that had not been available to either of them before the Thursday morning in October, and that was available to both of them now, and that they were inhabiting with the full presence they had both agreed to bring to it. Outside on Mill Lane, the November frost was doing what November frost did. Inside number 14, 2 people were reading. The tea cooled to drinkable. Samuel reached for his mug. Edna reached for hers. They drank.